My name's Murtagh. I'm a child of Glen. And I'm not sure why I'm here, but like, because I don't know much about history. I don't know much about biology. But what I do know is I'm here tonight and I have to make the best of it. So hopefully you'll bear with me and we'll have a bit of fun and a bit of enjoyment and maybe a wee bit of nostalgia and what have you. Glen lies to the north and east of Drummondtown. I'm sure most of you know Drummondtown Estate, Drummondtown College. It's bordered to a large extent by the A1 on its eastern side and to the townlands of four towns to the west. It is an area steeped in agriculture and particularly flax growing. And County Down by and large was a huge flax growing area, and it was a big industry in its day. Glen has several streams flowing through it, and that enabled mills to be built, flax mills for the processing of flax. And most of the farms, as a lot of you I'm sure are farmers, most of the farms will tell you they have 2 or 3, maybe more flax dams on their land, or had, that have since been grown over and gone by the way. But flax was a big issue, and that's where I come in. My grandfather on my mother's side was a scutcher, and he come from Tyrone. There was an advertisement placed by F.B. Small, who was a substantial flax grower and dealer, or call it what you want, for scutchers required in 1911. And it may well be as a response to that ad, I'm not sure of that, but he come to the Glen area and met my granny, Isabella Kennedy. My grandfather was a man named Daniel Hughes, and he come from Tyrone, and he was an experienced scutcher. And scutchers were in demand because of the huge demand there was for flax at that time. So Daniel Hughes, my grandfather, met Isabella Kennedy, and they got married in 1914. My mother, Mary Hughes, was born in 1923. So she then subsequently married my father, who was Harry Murtagh, or Henry Murtagh, to be exact, who came originally from Drummondtown, or just south of Drummondtown a bit, and to John Murtagh and Margaret McCamley. So they met and they got married and lived after they were married in Donaghmore, just a wee cottage behind the church, and they lived there until 1949. And during that time, from they got married to 1949, they had 3 children, Donald, Brian, and Emmett. And Emmett was a baby at 3 months when they come to Glen, what we call the Miltown. And the Miltown, as I see it, and most people regard the Miltown, is just down the Moneymore Road from the A1. If you're going towards Drummondtown, there's 5 semi-detached houses and a cluster of small houses that had been there prior to the building of the 5 houses. That really constitutes the Miltown. And those houses were occupied by couples that went on to have, most of them had very large families, and it become a very populous area. But it was called the Miltown prior to that probably because there were 3 mills in close proximity to that area, so it must have been a popular area at the time, or the council wouldn't have built the 5 houses. There must have been a demand for that area. There was 2 mills on the river and a corn mill, and we lived in the wee house on the, did you see, just you see the house, that's the actual house there. To the area. Now, the house that my father moved into was pretty basic, or my father and mother moved into was very, very basic. A 2-room bedroom house, stone walls, no running water, no electricity, a tin roof. 1 room had a ceiling, the rest of it hadn't. And there was my mother and father and 6 boys. And we had a stove, which probably there's some. That's my mother and father on their wedding day. In the middle is the wee house, and that's the family at various times. And I have to say, just before, this isn't a slideshow as such. These are only a few to give the feel of what it looked like and what it was. It's not a slide presentation, so excuse me if we're having a full monty of slides like a film. It's not like that. The narrative is going to be the bits and pieces that I have to tell. And this talk, the only way I could do it, I'm not an expert in all those things and the history and that, but what I do know is my own memories. And that's really what I'm going to try and convey. And we'll maybe get a wee bit of humour, as I say, and a bit of nostalgia. But that was the house, and when I moved in, now, my first memory of the house, it's just family shots. My earliest memory is, well, it's not my memory, but Mommy told me the earliest time that I drew attention was when she took me up to Granny's in the pram, and I climbed out of the pram and fell down 10 feet of steps. I broke my nose, and maybe she only made it up to excuse how I looked in case somebody looked into the pram. I don't know, but that's what was supposed to have happened in the very earliest. But my earliest memory is when our youngest brother came home from the hospital. I was about 4, and he was brought into the house. There was a brother older than me, but I don't remember him. Him and I 2 years apart. I don't remember him coming, but I remember the youngest boy, Rory, coming in, and I'm supposed to have said to Mum when she brought him in, and I showed you how much I had been running about outside, but he must have been the first baby ever I saw, because I told her to let him off. And my father related that story to a lot of people after, so it must have been true anyway. And a number of things would, excuse me if I'm taking a few pages and stuff like that, but there's a few things that come to mind here, and all of these things, and I don't want to bore you too much, but all of these things have a wee story. The wee chicken in the corner, I remember having a measles, and I was very sick. But Mummy came out in the town with a plastic hen about the size of your hand, and 4 eggs, plastic eggs, and you put the eggs inside the hen, and you pressed its legs, you pressed its legs and it laid an egg. And I thought it was the most fascinating toy ever was invented. And I remember that. That's why I wanted it put in. Now the rooster is because when we were very small, and it's one of the things, Mummy had a clothesline along by the sally bushes, and she was always going to clothesline, but the rooster got cross. And it flew at my mum a few times, and my father said he had sorted. So we were down and our house was beside the kill, what we called the kill, but it was the corn mill, and it was a corn mill for years. And I remember when I was young seeing the millstone in it. The millstone's gone since, and the mill has been built up into a house and all of that. But the kill was a fascinating playground for us. It was highly dangerous. And part of my delivery tonight is the freedom and the madness that we had compared to today. You know, the things that, and I must say we weren't wild in that sense. We put our own limits on it. We were like a cat in the sense we knew our distance, we knew where to come back. We would never went beyond the chapel. We wouldn't have went beyond the broad road. We set our own, but nobody was telling us you can't go there. It was just that time of freedom and what have you. But anyway, on the rooster, my dad, he was always cutting wood. We had a wooden stove. Everything was on the stove, and for heat, water, the lot. And he had always, so he told us to grab the rooster. I didn't grab it, the older brothers grabbed it, and got the rooster, and he took it down to the chopping block, and he had the rooster, and he chopped the head of the rooster. But he was holding the rooster by the neck. I remember it. I have about 5 or 6. And he's holding the chicken, and he kept his head up, but the chicken had jumped onto the ground and went mad, and everybody was running. It was running in every direction. And I've often heard the story, they're running about like a headless chicken. But I actually seen it, not that rooster, but it was a Rhode Island red rooster. And that was graphic, but that was what was done at the time. If you don't know it now, it would be coming for you in handcuffs. But anyway, and the goose, we always had a goose. The goose was there from all of my memory. And the goose used to come to the door at night and knock the door for bread with his beak. It always come to the door. But the goose was a great lair. And my father, he noticed that there was a lot of stones appearing in the nest and an odd cracked egg. And he, a bit of a mystery this, but he kept an eye out. And the next thing he sees was my immediate younger brother, Seamus, throwing stones at the goose. And he was only a child of maybe 3 or 4, and he was stoning the goose on the nest, and my dad grabbed him, turned him upside down and marched him to the river. And we were standing watching like criminals. Turned him upside down, he says, "That's where you're going if you stone that goose." and he screamed, but let him off, and he come running back up. I remember this like it was yesterday. Goose never had any problem. It cured the problem, you know. And these are just some wee bits and pieces. The other one was one with a collie dog called Lassie. Every collie dog was called Lassie in those days. But we had Lassie, and she had a litter of pups, lovely black and white pups. And my dad, he thought these great, we were going to sell these pups and what have you. But my brother Emmett, he was playing with them out in the grass at the front of the house. And the next thing a tinker's landed. "Oh, you give us a pup, give us a pup. Ah, we want a pup, we want a pup." I said, no, I can't give you a pup. He said, "We'll give you a goat, we'll give you a goat." and they give a goat for the pup. And Amma said, no, no, no. So we went 2 or 3 hours later, they come back. And they brought a wee black kid goat in. And Amma, being a child, foolish enough, he gave the pup to the gypsy and took the goat. And my dad come home and he says, oh, the pup missing out, the pup. And Amma says, oh, I give the pup to a man. He says, he give me a goat. And my dad went down and he looked at the goat. He says, yeah, get. He says, that's a buck. they give him a buck kid, you know, which was, in those days was useless. And we always had a goat. The goat, we always, she was a fawn-coloured goat, but she was a great goat. And we used it for milk. It was an essential point. And Paddy McCord did the houses with milk in the Miltown, but he only occasionally done us because whatever. But we lived and were reared more or less in goat's milk. She was a terrific milker. The other one was the wood, because my dad was always cutting wood, and there's a few bits and pieces of that maybe later on. That's the old stove, which everything, and it's very, very like it. That's what's happening here? It's very like the stove. It's a generic image picked up, but that done everything for my mum and 6 boys. And I have to say we were never hungry. But anyway, the pig's head was, and it's almost the identical image of Uncle James worked in 4 towns in Copeland's, and he was a terrific man. He was a good worker and kind but quiet, odd man in many ways, done his own thing. But he landed into Mummy one day with a bag over his back, and he walked over to the table, and we were all sitting, we couldn't fascinate what was in this bag, and he tipped the bag up, and out come a pig's head, cut off at the neck, covered in blood, just like that. And we were like, you know what I mean? And I actually never had seen a pig at that time in life, at that age, because you didn't have pigs. It was the first thing I saw. I thought it was a complete monster. But there's a wee bit about James later on. But that's sort of a few things. Other things that come to mind, my father could play the accordion. He was a good musician, but he never had a chance to play. But a lady in the Miltown, Rosie McDermott, who was a very formidable lady in her day. She was widowed fairly early, but she had the family, 5 of them. And Francis was the oldest, and she wanted Francis to play music. She bought him a wonderful accordion. And of course Harry Murtagh, oh, he can play. So Francis, he got the accordion, and he came down to Harry Murtagh for his first lesson. And we were all children standing around, we were fascinated, absolutely fascinated with this accordion. Took it out of the box and went, that's wonderful. Strung it out and what have you, and put the stops on. Francis took a chair, and my dad started to play the accordion, and 2 hours later he was still playing the accordion. Francis never got his lesson. So I don't know what happened after, but so much for the music lessons. Let's see, I have a few more. Oh yes, one of the really scary things that happened, we were prisoners in the house because Gibney's bull broke out with the whole herd of cattle, and the bull came into the yard and was in a Frisian bull. This is all just memories from an early age, but we couldn't get out. There was no telephones or anything, but the bull was really, really riled up, and it was stomping the feet, and it come right into the porch, or right close to the wee porch in the front of the house. This went on for ages and ages, and we thought we just thought it was the end of the world, that was the times was in it. Nobody, you couldn't ring, you just had to sit it out until the bull calmed down and the cattle moved on and somebody come to pick them up. But it was it was something from that we used to do. Another thing we had to do, Christy McLean was the first shop we had before Lizzie Cranny opened the shop, but Christy McLean at the 4 Mile, I don't know if any of the older people might remember, but Christy McLean, father of Walter McLean, had a shop at the 4 Mile, and we used to have, that's where we got the oil for the lamps, paraffin oil, and my brother and Ahmed and the older boys, but if they weren't there, we had to go. And this time of year, I remember walking 3 miles, or it's a mile and a half there and a mile and a half, maybe more, 2 miles nearly, in November in the dark. But for some reason it was much colder than it is now, and I think the weather was colder because our hands, we had to put socks on with no gloves to carry the gallon metal can of oil. And we carried that, and we fought the bit out from we got the oil. It was all right going over the empty can, but once it was full, I've carried it further than you. You carried it all of it, and between the two of us, going home. But you imagine nowadays, sending a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old to get oil in a dark country road in the night, but that's what was done. That's the way it was. You just did it and got on with it. And my memories and all of that, I was always hungry, but I never had hunger. You always got fed, you had a good dinner. I remember the spuds and cabbage and fried leeks and bacon, and I remember having a slice of bacon and looking at my dad's plate, and he had 2 slices and wanting the other one because you were hungry. And my dad used to complain. He used to say, "You've left nothing for the dog." That was the times you were in. It was just you ate. And in the early days, I have no memories whatsoever of sitting on a chair in the room, in the house, except when I was eating. I've no memories of sitting in a chair because there was nothing to do. You had no television. My dad had a radio, and that radio was a lifeline, an absolute lifeline, because everyone come through the radio or somebody passing. And the grocery man, Noel Hudson, would have come with the bread. Wonderful, magical, sliding trays. It's pulled the big lever and pulled the tray out, and you saw the buns. This is 1950s. And you were just gargling. We had no money to buy them, or didn't buy them, I should the money or not, but we didn't. But we had always that fascination. The grocery man, Granny would have bought on a Tuesday. McCann would have come to the Miltown, and she would have bought us lollipops. And we were always near the Tuesday in the primary school, and we always ran home anyway, but on a Tuesday you ran much, much faster because Granny had a lollipop for each of us, and plus our first cousins who lived in the Miltown, the Hugheses. But she was like that. But that was the highlight of the week. Just to get those small things. But anyway, on the radio, one Christmas, and Mommy always would have got you something, what you wanted. Usually toy guns or anything later on, but in the early days there'd be wee small toys and that type of thing. But this Christmas we must have been bored, but were turning at the radio, and it was one of those, was a square radio where the band travelled, that type of radio. And we were screwing, but we just screwed it a bit too far and broke the radio. And it was Christmas Day. My father went absolutely mental. And that was Christmas cancelled. And seriously, everything I'm telling you, well, it's words and all, or what it is what happened. And it's my memories. So it was absolute disaster because Boxing Day had horse racing coming. And the radio wasn't going to get fixed before Boxing Day. So anyway, Mummy, she was always a much softer touch than my dad, as in most cases they are. Anytime we'd done something wrong, Mummy used to, she was so angry, she used to run to this, we had a row of sally bushes, and she used to run to break a rod off the sally bush. But anybody knows Willow or Sally, you'd spend a half an hour trying to break it. But she would try and break it, and by the time she was halfway through, the temper had worn off, and she used to come walking back. And we always knew there was never any danger because she would never get the stick. But she talked Daddy into relenting, and we got our bits and pieces for Christmas about 4 o'clock that evening. And I don't know if the radio was ever fixed, really. But anyway, that's the well, and that's an actual well from. It's not the well we had because it was blocked over, but that is an identical well from an identical time, and that one's from Glen Chapel, where Jack Kennedy and his wife, who were in charge of the vestry and what have you in Glen Chapel, and that's from an old photograph that John here gave me before this talk. But that's where we got our well, and the water in the well, as anybody, modern people mightn't know, they haven't used well water, but there was very little wrong with well water. We always had good, cold, clear, clean water, and it never does us any harm. But the one was just at the end of the path where we were in the old house, just opposite side of the road from the kill. And that's a picture there from the lads in the Miltown, Thomas Hughes and the Murtaghs and me here in the end. That's what, from those memories, is from that wee fella on this side. You know, it's amazing how you take things in when you're young, and they become ingrained, and I'm sure everybody here can think of their own going back and the things that they come across and how much they meant to them and all of that. But this is, we used to play, this is a generic image, but when I got a wee bit older, we were allowed to go up the road in the sense of your older brother was going, so you would follow on and that type of thing. And that's when the intermixing with the Miltown became. And there was the McDermotts there, 5 boys and a girl. The Murtaghs, there was 13 in it, but the younger generation, there was 5 or 6 of them. There was the Crannies, the twins, Fidelma and Kenneth, my cousins, the Hugheses, Mackays, the Bagnalls, and there was a lot of young people in the Miltown. And by and large, it was always pretty amiable and what have you, but the Cowboys and Indians was a big thing. But I'll never forget the first time I saw a television. We had no electric, mind you, we had lamps, but I went into Bagnall's one day, and Lizzie Bagnall, who was a widow woman too, the husband died at a very young man, but Lizzie Bagnall had the first television in the Miltown, and it was black and white, of course. But I went in Remy took me into the kitchen, and Lizzie had the bicycle turned upside down in the kitchen fixing a puncture. And this object was in the corner going, and I'd never saw a television. And it was black and white TV, and it was motorbike racing from somewhere in England. But the only reason that it was motorbike racing was, I learned afterward, was because of the interlude between the horse races. She headed for the horse race, and Lizzie was a fanatic for backing on the horses, and always did. And she bought the television just to see horse racing. And the reason that the motorbike racing was on, because between races they would show some other type of sport. And that was the first TV I saw. That must have been about, I would have been through 5 or 6, 1956 or 57, Lizzie Bagnall had. And then very shortly after that, the other little woman in the row got a TV. And it was black and white, and the McDermotts and us were very close and great. And we used to go up the road, and this, Arwen's, my children here, they laugh about this, but we used to go up the road, and the door would open, please, Mrs. McDermott, can we watch TV? You know, and they always took you in. You always got to watch TV. And we watched, it was fascinating. We hadn't even electricity. We used to leave there watching TV, lights, and go down to the house for a lamp. And even then, it was straight to the bedroom, which had very little. The bedroom only had a wee lamp, a wee oil lamp, a wee tiny thing. And the one in the living room, as it were, it was living room, kitchen, it was all the one thing. There were only 2 rooms, and another room, which was a scullery, which had a half lantern in it, but it was just junk. You couldn't live in it. And there used to be noises in it. These weird noises coming from it. And we don't know what it was, but Mama used to think it was maybe rats, and she used to complain. But my dad, one time, he went and got a bag of flour, and he cleared the whole front porch off the top half of it. It was only a half lantern type thing, and he put flour all over it and smoothed it all down. And the noises come, but there wasn't a footprint in the flour. There wasn't a thing. There was no mice even. There was nothing in the flour. And he kept it there for a week, and the noise was there, and we used to hear the noises. Now, I don't know what they were, whether it's the wind going through the tin. It was a tin roof, and there was no damp-proof course or anything like that. Whether it was the wind or what, but there was weird in that part. The bedroom was in the other part, and we had an outside toilet, which loads of people had, but there's not many of them still living. You know, that era is gone, and well and truly gone. And people say everybody was the same. Sure, nobody had anything in those days, but that's not true. Because we were the only ones with no electricity. Every other house, Granny had no electricity. And she was still living at the time. And we had no electricity. But all the other houses had electricity. You know, it was basic time, but still they had electricity and all the benefits of that. You know, and I was 11 before I had electricity. 1961. And all this, what I'm talking about now, is before I ever had the electric, you know. But Mrs. Mace, or she become Mrs. Mace, Mrs. McDermott was terrific. She was a very outgoing woman and what have you, and we were in many ways competition with the boys and what have you. But come Paddy's Day, on a blink of sunshine, she had them in white shirts. We had them in white shirts, and I always remember how cold it was. It was skinny, but she thought this was terrific, putting the boys to school in these white shirts. And now, like, you wouldn't go out without an anorak in June. And those days, the summers were better. Like, they were warmer, and the bubbles of the tarmac was bubbling on the roads and all of that. But still, March And coming into April, it's not a time for white shirts, I tell you, but that was it because they were better style and what have you. But you hadn't a big choice of clothes. I had a wee brown corduroy jacket, cord jacket. And honestly, the sleeves, the cord all disappeared off the sleeves because, you know, what have you, you know. And I had it for years and years and loved it. Loved it. I'd say that I'm surprised I hadn't it on in that photo because, but that's, you know, that's how it was. And things were moving on in the sense that we were supposed to get a new house. They built 4 houses at Kennedy Villas and we were supposed to get one of them. And whatever skullduggery or whatever happened, Tim Kennedy was another man, not from the Miltown, but Tim had a large family in a wee small house down in the 4 towns. And Tim got one of them, and Harry Murtagh was to get another one, and Daisy Devlin, who had small children, was to get another one. But a couple of them went for the politics of the day, and not on a religious basis, not at all, but someone who knew somebody working in the council or what have you, that, and one man got a house, one man got one of them, and he wasn't even married. He was getting married, but he got one of the houses. And another one, the man had just married, and he got the other one, plus Tim and Devlin. So there was a whole hee-haw at the time about it, that Glen, you know, my father, he went to politicians, and devil knows what shouting about. He should have got a house. So they decided to build 4 more. And they built 4 more. And my dad was given the pick of them because of this. And I only learned this in the last month when I was talking to my brother about it. I says, why did we go to number 8? He said, you'd have thought they would have took the first one at the end of the road. We didn't, we went to the back. He says we went to the back because of the goat. He wanted to take the goat with him. And Jim Bryson, who owned the field, marching the houses. Jim and my father would have been fairly great. They've known each other for years. And Jim said, Harry, you can have the fort, an old fort behind it. He says you can have a fort for the goat. So he took number 8, and that's why we moved to number 8 in 61. But anyway, the Miltown, there was many sessions, you know, there was, it was the world in miniature. It really was. You had widow women meeting new men. You had young people emigrating. You had all the social issues of the day. You had neighbours falling out, and you had rows, and you had men coming home drunk and very drunk, and the grapevine used to come out. Oh, I shouldn't be saying names, but I'll say Jimmy just for it, but it wasn't Jimmy. But Jimmy's on the way down the road. Oh no, doors closed, lines pulled down, everybody locked up until he got settled, because the first house or the first person he'd have seen would have been a row. He would have picked on them for some what have you, just because of the drink. And the next day, a more civil person that wasn't on this earth. But that was the way it was. But I remember I was a bit older at the time, being up the road, and Jerry Murtagh, one of the other guys that I run about with, a wee bit older than me, but we were heading round to the old bridge. Maybe I keep knocking this off. There's a picture, it'll come up later. We're heading round the old bridge, and a few of the girls were walking in front of us, and they had a tennis ball or some sort of ball, and Jerry says to me, get the ball. And when they were throwing the ball from one to the other, I run in, caught the ball, and took the ball off them. And the oldest girl said, I'm telling my mama, I'm going to tell my mama. I was about 10 at the time, maybe. And she would go tell the mama. So anyway, we went on, and we're down the road, and there was a bank in the Miltown. We'll maybe show that coming through quickly. But we're lying on the bank, and Jerry and I was talking, and Jerry says, oh boy, he says, watch, he's just coming. And the mother had a huge reputation in the Miltown. She really had, and she was pulling the sleeves up. And he says to me, Jerry says to me, run. I said, I'm not running. I'm not afraid. He said, well, I'm running. He took off, and the woman, they come up to me and she said, you little, and she made a grab for me, and I jumped up, you see, on the bank, but as I jumped up, she got a hold of me, and I'm hovering away, and she reached in, caught me by the hair of the head. Caught me by the head, and before I could blink an eye, I was like the hobby horse in one point. I was going round the road. And my feet were 4 feet off the ground. And the only thing to the grip of was my hair. And the next thing, I'm on my hands and knees on the ground, half scalped, big bald patches on my head, you know. So that was summary justice. And a bit like my brother and the goose, I never took the ball again, that's for sure. But that was the sort of thing, and I actually was, when I went home, my father seen the way it was, my mother had to stand in front of the door with her 2 hands in the door to stop him going out because he was so angry and all of that. But that was all just a kind of domestic issues that were kind of settled on the spot, but it wasn't it wasn't the most pleasant of experiences, I can tell you, and probably I deserved it, but sure, here and now. Let's see that. Oh yeah, and then we went to school. That was the thing. School days. Went to St. John's Primary School in Glen. Just to see where we are. That's a school picture there, but that's us 3 there. That's me and my 2 younger brothers, Rory and Seamus, at St. John's School there in Glen. A very good school. And a lovely school, comfortable school, and I have very happy memories of the primary school as such. The biggest and most pleasant memories of it are the dinners, because we were in a house where you got 1 pot wonders really most of the time on a stove. And everybody, 6 of us competing for it. But when you went to school, you were getting a 2-course meal, you know, with a different meat or fish or what have you, bacon, every day, on rice and sago, which we called frog spawn. I don't know if they still make sago or not, but we got it anyway, and rice. Lovely dinners, great. And I was fortunate enough to be in Mr. McAllister's class, and for some reason, I don't know why, but he kind of took a bit of a shine to me, I don't know. And I never got on the wrong side of him, but if you got on the wrong side of him, you'd have known about it. He was a very cross and hard taskmaster, and there are things that I could talk that maybe just aren't in the flavour for a light-hearted evening, you know. But the Mrs. McDermott, the woman I was talking about earlier, was in the kitchen, and her sister Annie McKay, and they made sure children got a proper dinner, like got what you find. Some places you would just get the spoon and all, but she put out And the dinners come in big metal trays like that from Warren Point, and Seamus McCrank and I had the lovely job of going out and carrying them in. And when the lids come off, the smell, oh my word, are absolutely unforgettable, because you never got the like of it at home. I don't care, my mommy was a great cook and all of that, but just didn't cut the mustard with the school dinner and the choice you had. They were great. But one day, on a different note as such, before that, we were picked for the 11 plus class. Mr. McAllister, there was Mr. Conlon, Mrs. Fitzsimons, and Mr. McAllister. Mrs. Fitzsimons had all the intake, the young ones. Mr. Conlon had the, what would you call it, the general class, and anybody that might be potential possibly for 11 plus went to Mr. McAllister's class. And it was very discriminatory. I can even see at that age, you know, if he didn't pick you to do, he wanted 100% pass. He didn't want any failures. I don't know why. But if you weren't picked, you didn't get doing the 11 plus. But a few people in my year said, we want our children, we want them to do 11 plus. And they won their case, but they weren't taught for it. I could see it plain. I'm only a pupil, but I could see that they weren't getting that wee extra that you need for to do like 11 plus. At that time when I done it, it was maths and English. It wasn't the multiple choice and all of that sort of thing. But 9 sat for it. 6 chosen by Mr. McAllister and 3 who wished to do it. So 9 sat it, and 6 passed and 3 failed. And that was the system, because he had 100% control. He had there was no, I never knew of any inspectors. Maybe there was people that were in education, maybe could tell you better, but I don't know if there was any inspectors. But those 3 people were more than capable in my book of doing 11 plus. All they needed was a wee leg up, and to be in the group of sharing, to be in that group. And I've thought that I've always, and these are memories that I've retained this, and I always thought that was a, what would you call it, miscarriage of justice. But anyway, Mr. McAllister come to Seamus McCrank and I, we were the ones carrying in the dinner cans, and we were there was no such thing as a prefect, but anything needed done, we would, just before that, I wouldn't know the wee story. One day, we always got milk at 10:30, and one day there was a rumour going through the school there was no milk. And then some milk appeared, and it seemed that half the school milk had disappeared, the great milk heist. And everybody, it was the top of the school, you know, in primary school, the wee boys were getting no milk, so they had to share bottles of milk. The bottles would have been brought in, and what happened was that, and again, it's to do with the Miltown boys coming home from dancing in Uri and Parochial Hall, the older boys from the Miltown, the boys that are all now in Canada or went away to Canada, all stole the milk or drank the milk on the way home, because they had to walk out of the town. That time, if you wanted home, you walked out. But they drank the milk, and it was the crime of the century. Absolute crime of the century, drinking the school milk. And we thought, and when we heard it was in the Miltown, we were sort of all, because the primary school had mixed from everywhere, you know, but you didn't want to be seen to be maybe your older brother or whatever. But Martin McAllister come to Seamus McCrank and I one day, and he says, you have to go with Mr. Caulfield. Mr. Caulfield was the school attendance officer. And he never told us what we're doing. Mr. Caulfield come in his wee green van. Sure, is there anybody here know, he was from Warren Point, anybody know Mr. Caulfield? No? He was a school attendance officer for years and years in the 50s and 60s. But we had to go to the van and get into the back of the van. Now, we weren't told what we were doing. Just because he told us, we climbed into the back of the van. No, I climbed into the back, but Seamus McCrink got into the front seat. He was laid in the front seat during the war, and I was in the back behind. And we drove away into the country. And we drove to the Four Towns, to a wee labourer's cottage, where there was a boy in there who wasn't attending school. But Mr. Coffey says, you have to grab this lad and take him out to this van. This is in 50, what was it? I left the primary school about 60. The last year, maybe I was 10. So, Jesus, macho man type thing. People think we have a big important job here. And we went into the house, and the old lady, who would have been at that time maybe in her 80s or very close to it, and the younger daughter, who was the aunt and granny of the boy. The boy's a Points Pass lad, originally. But he was living, and he wouldn't go to school, and they didn't send him to school. And because of that, he was being re-housed, call it what you want. But we didn't know what was happening, but we went in, and the old woman had a tea towel, and she was waving it about, you're not taking him, you're not taking him, screaming and crying. And there's something very, what would you say, heart-wrenching would be my word for it. Now, I was at that age, but I felt it very, very, and I still feel it, difficult. To grab that wee fella and put him out, and we dragged him out. And he didn't, in all fairness to him, he didn't fight too much. But he didn't want to go, and they were screaming, you can't take him. But we took him, put him in the van, in the back of the van, and I got in with him. And we drove to Points Pass to one of at the top of the town, wee houses. And he was taken, we didn't take him up the door now. Mr. Coffey caught him by the collar and took him up to the door, and a woman come to the door and took the boy in, and there was a few words, and we were sitting watching this, and there was a few words exchanged between the mother or Mr. Caulfield, and he come back down and into the van, and he never spoke a word, and he drove us back to school and let us out at the gate, and we went back into school as if it was just another day at the office. You know, and that was the times that were in it. That you could do that in those days. I don't know whether you could do it or not, or whether it was right. But and I don't know entirely, but I do believe that the lad done it well, went to Canada and all of that, and got that's us. Another thing, football in our lives was a huge thing. My father was the coach and manager of Glen in their heyday. Glen were a very formidable team in the late 50s and early 60s, at the same time as Down, were Pinnacle and Down won the All-Ireland in 60 and 61. And my father was manager of Glen. A lot of the Glen players were essential parts of the Down setup. And the championship, that's the championship trophy of 1961, I think that one is, there. And football was always part of our make-up. Mommy, in the old house, washed all the jerseys on that wee stove and hung them out to dry and washed them, as well as look after us and all of that. But my dad was a canny manager, and was the first, I'm told, and we have memories of all the football things and all of that, but he was the first to talk about tactics. Tactics in football wasn't heard of. In the earlier days of playing football, you grabbed the ball and you try to get down the field and you try to score and you try to stop the almost scoring, but there was no thought on how to play it, and my father was very canny in that he would have said, if there was a big man catching everything, well, you keep the ball away from him, you make sure you don't go down his side and all of that. And one thing that he done, that they were playing a very tight game somewhere, and it was a very, very windy day, and Glen were going to be playing against the wind in the second half, and the other team then would have the advantage of the big long ball. And my dad made one of the guys take all the balls and dip them in the river for the break. And that time there were leather balls, and they soaked the water up like a sponge, and the balls were a ton weight. So when the other team had the wind advantage, they were kicking the ball, and it was going nowhere with the wind. It was as heavy as a ton weight, you know what I mean? And they were laughing, how would you thought of it, but he did, and that sort of thing. But anyway, because of his connection to football, when Down won the Sam Maguire, and this is definitely 100% genuine. When Down won the Sam Maguire was brought to our house, the old house, and because of Daddy's connection to the football. And the first thing he did was said, hey, come on out here, and took us down to the old kill. And at the kill there were banks and brambles and what have you. He says, now grab a lot of blackberries there. And we, a whole lot of us, all grabbed blackberries. And now what do you want? He says, throw them in there. And he took the Sam Maguire and he says, now he says, you can tell your grandchildren you've picked blackberries in the Sam Maguire. And I don't want to rail too many here, but like our ma had hardly ever seen the Sam Maguire. and there we were picking blackberries in it. And that is, as I say, stayed up. But it was a cute one, and there was a piece on RTE where some woman had wrote a book on the history of the Sam Maguire and wanting wee anecdotes about the cup and what have you. And Joe Kernan was on, late a few weeks ago, but Joe Kernan was on it, and he was telling them about the broken trophy. He had a wee crockery thing for runners up in 77. Armagh were beaten 77 in the final, like Dublin I think it was that year. And he was manager when they won it in 2002, and he went in at half time, and he said to the team, the trophy was broken in his house because it wasn't thought of much anyway, runners up thing. And he threw it on the table and he says, is that what you boys want? Is that what you boys want? Because that's what I got in 77, he says that. And this was in the book, you see, and he was on talking about it, and they turned around and they won it. They won the winner's medal. But I thought, but that story was as good as that one. But anyway, that's football in our day. I have a time, a bit more time, yeah. As I say it, I'm a young man. I think young man. I said it right. Why am I doing here talking about old times and all that? But I suppose there isn't many 70-year-olds that have lived in the conditions I did for the first 10 years. So that in itself is something. But I have been working from I was 6, and that's absolutely true. This is not made up to enhance it. My dad, when he moved into that house, first thing he done was whitewashed it, and then he started into the garden. He was a handyman by trade, and he worked around all the farm. He was very good at building and doing roofs and all sorts of things, and he worked for Barney McNally and different farmers all over the place. Farmers were always improving old sheds that were inherited and dilapidated and putting roofs in, and he would have done that, but it was always, a day here and 2 days there, and he'd be at home a day, and my mother worked in Grubbs at Drumbanagher in the big house, and she talked about, this is when we were in the old house, she talked about having to gut out pheasants and ducks and all that for the feast, and when I took up shooting when I was 16 and was bringing home pheasants, we always had to do our own. She would never touch the pheasant because she had her sickener of it as it was, and she worked in Bryson's and places cleaning, and you done everything you could to get a pound or two. But we had about a half an acre or maybe a bit more of a garden at the back of the house, and my dad planted strawberries in it. And they're talisman strawberries. And at that time there seemed to be a wee bit of the way some things come to, and most farmers catch on it, and the strawberries seemed to come in, and strawberries were planted in around the places. I think John's father were at the strawberries, Petey Cunningham, Boss Cunningham in Bar were the strawberries, and my dad had a smaller plot. But he dug it by hand, like a half an acre. It was more than half an acre, but he dug that by hand. That was a fair bit of digging, and put the strawberries in, and we had to pick them. And my first memory, I was about 6 when I started to pick the strawberries when they come in June. And the first thing you learned, and it was essential the rest of the days, and I picked strawberries for a good number of years, and I have to say myself and my brothers and all, and probably because of this, were superb pickers of strawberries. Because the main reason you were so good was you didn't eat them. You didn't eat them. You got into the garden and you were seen eating a strawberry, you were soon in trouble. You didn't eat them, and you know the way most people love the big ones, and but you had to put them into the punnet. That was the rule. And years later, or not so many years later, we would have been picking hays in the evening and then going to pick for J.P. Morgan or Petey Cunningham. Petey Cunningham had a huge field at Lorgan. It's all houses now, but it's fantastic field of strawberries. Petey was a character. He used to send Mary Mulholland or come himself in the car to gather us up, and he'd keep the lads from the Miltown and ourselves, and we landed at the strawberry field in Lorgan area. And the first thing Petey done, as soon as he dropped us off, was, and Petey would have walked with his hands going like that, he walked away across the bottom of the strawberry field and then behind a big elderberry bush in the corner and sat down, and that was his daily duty. And we knew this. And to enhance the picking, he used to bring people out of the town. And the townies, as we called them at that time, that's the next one. All right. Aye, this is the work. That's the strawberries here, and pretty accurate. But the strawberries were the first to come in the season. I would have tied hay as well when you wrapped it, and I know all about hay being tied. It was the easiest job in the world until there was thistles in it. And anybody that tied hay would know what it's like tying hay with dry thistles in it. Your arms weren't too good, but anyway, I done all that. But going back to the strawberry fields in Lorgan Air, the townies, the first thing they had done was stuck themselves to the strawberries. This was manna from heaven for them. They were putting. And then, maybe an hour later, oh God, they had to go. And like the strawberries in my working life, health and safety, welfare, it wasn't even in the dictionary. It wasn't even in there. And they had nowhere to go, only up behind the buttery bush. And if you went behind the buttery bush, you would have been hard pressed to find a spot that hadn't been contaminated, I can tell you. And they were in a rush because the strawberries were working on them. And they were coming down and their shoes was plastic. And it was absolute a minefield. I would just love to have a picture of it now, because if you had a, what do you call the wee things that take photographs, a wee micro, or what do you call them, the drone. If it was a wee drone, it was like the mountains of Mourne, and that was all Petey. But the other thing, my cousin was the ganger. He was the man overseeing it, and a more hateful old devil than ever was. My first cousin, he was dreadful. Like every box, he shook it up to make sure that they clamped down. You got paid by the box. And we would used to put you 10 boxes. And I was a shilling a box, I think. That was 10 shillings. And by the time he shook them and pressed them down, it was 5 shillings. Oliver, my own cousin. And the boys used to be talking about that, you know, and they didn't know he was my cousin, but you had to go with the flow. But the other thing, going to the strawberry field, you brought a lunch. And the lunch that time, there was very, very little ingredients for lunch. You had the bread, but the only thing you ever had was tomatoes. Like, there was no ham really in those days. Ham come much later. But it was tomato sandwiches and lettuce. My dad always had lettuce and scallions. And they were delicious, like, you know. But the only trouble was the tomatoes were soaked into the bread. You know, and by the time you were getting it, you were lifting it and it was half mush. But at least you were getting it, because we twigged on very early. There was a tree in the field, a couple of trees. On your bag, you had to hang it on the tree, because Cunningham's Oil Dogs, there was 2 of them, Dan and Petey. Dogs knew there was a free lunch, and they would have jumped up. So we had to learn very, very quickly for the weakest one to get on your shoulders to hang it high, so the dog couldn't get at it. But we were safe. But the tinies, they just threw it on the ground. They didn't know. They just brought the bag and they never thought of the dog, and nobody told them. And they lost 4 lunches. And Boss Cunningham had said, "Go up to Maggie," that was the mother. And you run up to Maggie, and Maggie with a tale of woe. "I have no bread, I'm not feeding the country, I have no bread." And I virtually went hungry for the day. Brooks has had a shop, but you had to pay for it, and you weren't paid for strawberries. And it wasn't as if you went strawberry picking and money in your pocket. You didn't, you know, and it was, like, it's the way it was. But the strawberries were good money. You definitely got good money out of it, in the sense of there was no money in anything else. And just talking about money, we lived through an age where you brought the money home and you give every penny of it to the mummy. They handed it all in. Some of the older people here would probably remember that, appreciate that. But we did that. And you know, you went out and worked all day and you brought it into the house, and the mummy gave you a bit for yourself. But essentially, it was needed. It was, I keep saying this, but it's the way it was. And we had no qualms about it. I never had any hang-ups. You know, you got a bad feeling about things and you didn't like doing this and that. But I was always kind of chuffed to have this money to give. And it was the same when we went to pick the potatoes, which was much bigger money. But between the strawberries then, the hay was just on pay. I was working with older men from our part of the country, from the Miltown and that, and they complained about, we were working for at the time with Petey Bowl over at Meanan, and we tied all day for I think about 3 days at the hay, and Petey Bowl gave me the same money as the rest of the men. But I tied every bit as much as them. And the man says, what are you doing? He says, that's not right. He says, that's only a lad. He says, that's only a lad. And Petey Bolt says, a bit like, oh Lord, you got your pay. What I do with that lad is my business. I'll always remember that. I was very young, but it was done fair. And most of the farmers, I have to say that, I hear people talking about different things, but there were 6 boys in our house, and any farmer that was about needed a hand knew if they come to our house they'd get someone or other. But I've never worked for any of them that weren't decent. Really wasn't. All decent men and paid what was due. I used to work taking in bales for Jim Smith at the Crown Bridge, Crack Bridge. And Jim Smith, not only would he have paid you, but he'd give you something. And well, he paid me on a Saturday evening, and he says, hang on a minute. And he ran into the hen house, and he come out with a rooster. And he ran the snack, and it was still flapping when he gave it to me. And I put the rooster over the bar. I had the bike with me. And I put the rooster over the bar of the bike, and I'm heading back up the Drummondine Hill, but I had to walk up. But when I got to the top at McGuinness's, it was all downhill to the chapel. And I had the rooster hanging over the bar, but the head of the rooster got into the front wheel, and the next thing I'm down the bank. And by the time I got myself carried up, the bike wasn't damaged, but by the time I got myself brought up, the head was off the chicken, and the blood was running everywhere. And I had a trail of blood from Glen Chapel to the Miltown. But that was the sort of the man that did that, you know. And then the potato picking. No, the blackberries come. I have a wee quick one for the blackberries if I'm not born. It was great competition in blackberry picking between the Murtaghs and the Miltown, ourselves and the McDermotts. We were the three main, and they had, and the more you had contributing into it, the more weight you had. But Harvey was the man who was buying the blackberries, and he would have come around, and he left barrels for you to put it in, the blackberries. And the McDermotts were always winning. They had more weight, and they hadn't more people, and we were slow to pick up on it. But the Murtaghs next door must have found out. But the McDermotts were putting water. You know when you put blackberries in, the juice comes out of them. But they were adding water, and they're putting the weight up. So the Murtaghs then, they twigged on, we'd put water in too, and they put that much water in. Harvey kicked a massive row, and he wouldn't take any of the blackberries. And we had all our blackberries, and there was no water in them, and then he relented. He must have had a market for it, and he relented, and he come back. But it just shows you at an early age where, what would you call it, fiddling in the books comes into it, you know. But Harvey come for a long time, and the blackberries was a good source of money too. All very essential. And the potato picking, I thought I picked potatoes for a lifetime. But when I thought about it, the potatoes lasted a pretty short time. Really, maybe I was picking potatoes from what would have been, say, 8 or more. And by the time I become 16 and started to work in a full-time job, the potatoes were more or less finished at that time. They carried on a wee bit. But in the very early days of picking, you picked in a bag. You had a wire basket, and you had to carry that to empty it in a bag. And in no time at all, the bag became a box. The bags were, you used to get a shilling a bag. First of all, Fletcher and that used to pay per day, and that wasn't paying. Nobody wanted to pick potatoes all day, so they introduced the bag rate then, and it was a shilling a bag, and you picked them up. And I was picking for Turley's, and I still, in Oliver Turley's wee book, have a record per bag. I picked 63 bags in one day, which is 3 ton and 300 weight of potatoes, and I wasn't that terrible old. But we twigged on very quickly. 2 people gone was a hindrance, and we were the first at Turley's to pick on your own. You used to have 2 people with it moving the basket and picking into it, and that was uneconomical. It didn't work out, so you done away with the one person and you were picking on your own. And then you set the bags at whenever the drills were all that way, and you picked your potatoes up till the basket is full. You knew where the basket is full, that's where you started your line. You went to the next one, you started another line. So every time you dug a drill, the only thing that was coming against you was maybe the wee distance to the bag till the bags were filled, but you weren't going down. And it's funny at an early age how you learn these things. But picking into the bag then was done away with, and they introduced the 20 bag boxes. And you then, there was a bit of a fight about the rate for the boxes, but you had a rush to get the boxes filled, and you had more walking. But it was still a good way of making money, and we made really good. And that was when you got your new clothes. That was when you got your footwear. That was when you got any clothes you want. You didn't get it. You didn't get new clothes. I was saying about the jerkin. You didn't get new clothes until the money from the spuds come in. And it had added bonuses too, because we were getting that wee bit older, and you then had a few pound more to yourself. You handed it in, but you still got a bit more back than you would have with the strawberries, and it was the spuds was a fair, decent earner. My brother Emmett and I was 8 and he was 10, and we took ourselves to Newry. He told me, and I had never been in Newry, and I don't know, I'd never been to Newry on my own. Mummy used to take us in the bus and go to the Florentine and buy ourselves a chip and that type of thing, fish and chip. And you would have been with her, but you only got a chip, you didn't get a fish. And you're always looking a bit like the bacon, you're always looking at the fish, you know. You always got a bit of it, but you didn't get a full fish because it's too expensive. But we went to Newry, and the Florentine, or the Frontier Cinema, opposite the Newry Market, the Frontier Cinema. I don't know, anybody been into the Frontier Cinema? Yeah. The Frontier Cinema was the first picture house in Newry, but way before the Savoy. And the first film that ever I saw, now I had only been watching TV in the neighbours' houses, and they were black and white TVs. I never saw a colour image. And we went into the Frontier Cinema, Emmett and I, we got the bus, and he marched me to the front seat. And the front seat was like sitting here, and there's the screen. It really was. And the film was Ben-Hur. And it was mind-blowing. But I spent most of the time turning around, diving out of the seat. You hear that joked about in different times, you've been that close, but the chariots were coming. It was the Roman chariots, and the blood, and I was sure the horse was coming over me, and I never settled the whole film. Every time there was an image or a sword, by with a sword, you're ducking down your head. We should have been away at the back, but we'd never been in the pictures. We didn't know what it was about. But I thought he was great to take me with him at 8. I don't know if 2 children now would be allowed to go to town to a cinema on their own. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. It's hard to know, but it's just as it were, you know. And that was that as such. And that's that's enough about work. This one here is Chapel Days, it's called. And like these lads here, those are lads from the Miltown. I come on a wee bit behind them, but I was an older boy, believe it or not. In Glen Chapel. This is Glen Chapel, a contemporary picture, but it hasn't changed very much. It's been tidied up at times. and that's me making my communion. But chapel is an evolving thing too. I was an altar boy, but when you started being an altar boy, there was usually 2, 3 altar boys. You see 2 there, and mass would have been served with maybe 2 or 3, 4 altar boys. And then, whether it's a sign of the times, altar boys started to get a bit scarce and stuff, and they reduced the need for altar boys. And lo and behold, on one occasion, I was left to be altar boy on my own. And I had never done altar boy on my own, and I never actually had been principal altar boy as such. He was the one that was in charge of ringing the bell, and you ring the bell at the Eucharist. So I was a nervous wreck, really. I must have been. But and the priest that day was very stern and what have you. But it was coming near the time, but I wasn't sure what was the right time. But I didn't know how much. The bell had a handle on it and 4 bells, a brass dome thing, and I wasn't sure how much to shake it or anything. So I lifted the bell just to feel the weight of it, and I gave it a shake and the bell rang. and the next thing, the priest looked round and there was a bit of a murmur in the store. And then when it come to the time when the priest lifted the Eucharist up, I was that nervous, I didn't ring the bell, and then he was taking it down and I rang the bell. It become a complete, I'll never forget it, it was an absolute disaster. And after the Mass was over, we were riding the side and everybody was talking about who was on that bell, you know. It was sort of keeping your head down anyway. But that was my time as an altar boy. Most of the time you had 2 or 3 other lads. And we had a priest who was very, what would you call it, wicked anyway, well, controlling, authoritative, whatever you want. And he knew where you were lads. And you always talk, all lads talk. So he had been out getting the altar ready, and he had come in, he said, Paul McNeely was, not a clown. And he said, who was talking? You tell me who was talking, and he'd pick on one and intimidate him. And of course they'd blame somebody else. And then he had the hand out and he took the cane that was for snuffing the candle and he whacked you. You know what I mean? You got whacked for talking, but you weren't allowed to talk in the rest of it. But anyway, I suppose it was times that were coming and all of that, but, and maybe this is why, what would you call it, dodgy areas, but we had a priest who had a bit of a reputation for, asking curious questions. So we would have had to go to confessions on a Saturday night, and us lads used to all gather outside, and it was a complete fighting match who was going to go first. That Father Seamus Reedy was moved on to Belfast then eventually, but and he had a bit of a reputation for asking young fellows questions that you certainly didn't want to answer. But you would have went into him, and whoever was coming out, he was interrogated. What did he say? What did he ask you? What was he asking you? So as you could kind of prepare yourself to. So it was really weird because when you went in the first, you were there for confessions. So when you went in, the first question you asked, you had to go and tell him a lie. The very reason you were going in the first place. So that was a time. And then there was a lad, at that time, if there was any sort of teaching was, if there was anything very serious, it would have to be heard by the bishop type thing. So there was a lad in our country, Frank Murtagh, had a bit of a reputation for being a wild boy and what have you. So we were standing outside, but Frank had to go down to leave in something to the best of November deadlift or something. But Paddy Kennedy standing with the crowd of us, and Paddy says, "Oh, look," he says, "there's Frank coming with a letter for the bishop." You know what I mean? But then we things you sort of remember, but we made light of it all, and we were lucky we were able to do that. That wasn't always the case, and what have you. But that was my chapel days as such. This is Jack Kennedy, who was in charge of the vestry, and that's Jack's wife and some of his grandchildren and what have you. And that's the Morgan family, who would be grandchildren of Jack. The Kennedys were big. I should mention the Kennedys are a very big extended family in Glen and the Miltown area. And I'm not an authority on it, but I'm told that the complete clan come from 3 brothers going back a couple of 100 years or more. So it's amazing. There would be, John could maybe tell us, there would be hundreds of that family in the Glen area really now, you know, and that's, they're very, we were always, when we would be down below, there would be no messing about, because Jack Kennedy would see you and you'd be in trouble, you know, that type of thing when you were smaller, but it was great times. And then, this is my Uncle James. He's the man who brought the pig's head into us. But in 1960, James went to Warren Point on the 15th of August. It was a big thing to go to Warren Point for a few drinks, and the local men went to Warren Point, and James, the boys said they were going for more beer or more drink, and James said, no, I have to go to work, I'm going home. And he walked out the Newry Road and was killed. But the first we knew about it was that John McIlorm come down and he shouted for my father to go out. My older brother was telling me this. I don't remember it. I remember it all right, but I don't remember the conversation. And he shouted, Harry, I need a word with you. Harry, come out. And John McIlorm had heard on the radio that a man of a certain description, and he thought the description, he told my father, sounded very like Rod. Rod Hughes was his nickname. Everybody knew him as, but it was James. And my dad went in and he said to Mummy, John McIlorm says there's not good news about a man, but I don't know. And Mummy immediately shouted for Brian to go up to James, to Granny. He was living in Granny's house, to run up the road and see his James home. And I followed up. I remember following Brian up to the house, and the curtains were open. And Brian looked in, but there was nobody in the house. And Brian knocked the window, but nobody come. And when we went down to the Mummy's, we said there's nobody in, but the curtains was open, and Mummy knew, and she put her hands up to God and started to shout. My father then made more inquiries, and they had to go and identify him and what have you. But about a month or 3 weeks after it, a bag come to our house, like a canvas type bag, and it was left at the door. I knocked the door, and I don't know who brought it in, but the bag was brought in to the 1 room house, and the table beside the stove, and opened the bag and tipped it out, and it was all James's clothes. I'm talking about the times that are in it, and Mummy was there, and the shirt and suit completely covered like a brown. I can see them yet. I was there, I've seen it, like a brown staining all over the shirt, which was all the blood. And that was set on the kitchen table a few weeks after he was buried. And that was how it was done. No counselling, no bereavement, what have you. That send that home, or to where it belongs. So that was a very sad time about our house anyway, you know. That's the newspaper at the time. It says he was identified by his brother. He was actually identified by my dad because the brother wouldn't go in. He was too annoyed and what have you, but that was James Q. So that was tragedy of Moneymore's the town land where the Miltown sits in. 187 acres or something like 287 acres, I think. This was another very close friends of mine when we were growing up. Those are twins, that's Kenneth and Fidel McCraney. And that wee girl was killed in a car accident about, I should know the date, but about 1970 or thereabouts. And it was the first young person in the Miltown to die tragically like that. And it created a lot of, well, you know, annoyance, and everybody was upset because great wee girl and great lad, they were twins, and that was another, for memories, sensitive time and very sad. I've brought this in because it's memories again, and my Uncle Paddy used to come. Now I was 9 at the time this happened, but my Uncle Paddy used to come down to the house, and this is the time that Pearl Gamble was murdered, and Robert McLaddery was accused of the murder and being investigated, but he hadn't been charged at that time, and he was still free, and the papers were full of it, and my Uncle Paddy had a huge interest in it. And I became very aware of it because of Paddy coming in. Is the reporter right yet? There's the front. Did you get the Sentinel? What's the later? And he wanted to hear. He was engrossed because it was so close to us. It's only in 3 mile or down the road at Sharp's Corner, of the Mully Road, really. And my Uncle Joe was a roadman at the time, and they found a shoe. And the shoe belonged to Pearl Gamble, apparently, and we knew this. And the other thing, that why it was in the papers, Mummy was very, very annoyed because she used to get the bus into Newry, and Robert McLaddery's mother would have got on the bus at the Mully and sat in the seat with Mummy into the town. And they were very great, as the saying would be at that time. A lovely lady. And Mummy couldn't really believe this, that because she knew the mother, she didn't know the lad. And all of this was going on. But that was a memory that I have of, and it was the first time ever in my life that I took any sort of recognition of murder or anything like that. You wouldn't have known that. That was disastrously to change in the subsequent years and all, but at that time it was all new, and that's why that was put up there. That was the sort of headlines that was being made in all areas, but particularly our area, being so close, you know. And a couple of wee things that my father was a great man at telling stories. Well, only another thing on a death. If I want to stay, I don't want to be too, what do you call it, subdued. But a few years later, this is all until I moved to a new house. We moved to a new house, and just on a wee late note, we moved into a house with electricity for the first time. We moved in October 61. And the first thing we'd done, we were fascinated. We switched the light off and on. Off and on and off and on. And the bulb blew. Now, we sat in the dark till the next day. because nobody in the house knew, my father, mother included, nobody knew you could take the bulb out and take one from another and put it over. We sat until Mummy went to the town and bought a new bulb. The shop didn't have them. You had to go to the town. That was our fascination with electricity, and we're sort of hoping for the whole telly lamp. But anyway, my father used to tell bits of stories and stuff like that, but the one he used to tell us all the time was when he was a lad and he'd go to Mass with his Father John, and we were going to Mass in Bar and going down the road. There was a wee man used to come out to the gate and he'd lay over the gate. He told us the man's name, but my brother and I can't remember who the man was, but he used to say, John, look at all them lovely wee children. You're all going to be so disappointed. You're all going to be so disappointed. See, you know there's nothing there. and what he called my grandfather, he used to say, come on, and he used to make them, every time they come near the gate, they had a sprint pass before he could convert them. He was an unbeliever. But and he used to tell us wee bits and pieces. But he was telling us one about he could divine. He could find. He used to sink wells. Him and James Kennedy used to travel the farms of the country sinking wells for people. And they were going over to Glasgow to look for a well. And they arrived at the house. And they knocked the door, and there's nobody come to the door, and they knocked the window, and the man inside shouted, come in, it's on the latch. So they went into the house, and the man's sitting up in bed, and he's shocking bad coil or what's heavy, and he's revving his flame out, you know, and between speaking, he's revving this out into the spittoon beside him. So they established where he wanted them to look for the well, and away they went, and they were working away all morning, and about dinner time or something, they heard your man shouting, come up, and they went up and he said, a broth for you, a broth. So he went in and he said to me, here, take that one there, and my dad said, no, I'm not bother that one, no, give me that other one there. And the mug, you see, so he told, well, that's all right, sure, all the same, he says. So he gave my dad this one, and he gave James Kennedy the other one. Now, James Kennedy was a man with the lightest stomach on earth. He just couldn't stand anything, you know. And he poured the broth. James took the broth, my father took the broth, and we were going back down, and James says, Harry, says, what the hell is all that right about? He says, what are you throwing about the old mug for? He says, James, he says, sure, that was the mug he was spitting into this morning. And James had taken a soup out of it. And another one that went over to Malone's, talking about Leonard there. I don't mean any disrespect to Leonard or anything I've said or that type of thing. But Lena was the mother, and Lena had a big griddle on the open fire, and there was bacon on it, big slices of bacon, and the smell in the house was fantastic. And she brought them in. It was now wet morning, my dad says. And she was waiting on the bacon cooking anyway on the thing. And one of the children at that time, maybe Joe or what have you, he come running over the floor, and he sat down on the floor and he packled on the floor. And Lena walked over, I'll get you, she says, and she scooped it up in her hand and fired it, and it stuck to the hearth behind the griddle. And they're all sitting waiting on the bacon. And then he told the one about, I talked about Alice McKeown, Alice the Blues it was called. Alice's man, he died anyway, but he was very, apparently he was very bent over. and the undertaker had an awful job. And they were having the wake, but they got him into the coffin anyway. And at that time in Ireland, everybody went to wake, but they only went for the stout. Everybody got bottles of stout, and they were all sitting late, and they're drinking the stout. But wee Billy Murtagh, who would be Rosie McDermott, Rosie's father, Billy was a bit of a devil, but Billy seen all the boys, and it was at the time it was only an old dim light, maybe a candle or two burning, what have you. But Billy, he went over, and what they had done, he twigged on what the undertaker had done, and the undertaker had strapped the body into the coffin with a belt. And Billy went over and he took a penknife and he slipped the penknife on the body, and the body started to rise up slowly. And the boys couldn't get out the door. So that one, and then another one, just a wee story on another one there, just a wee quickie one. It was Sam Bowl. Sam Bowl and the wife used to fall out, like all couples fall out, and they had a bit of a row, but the wife was an awful woman for ringing the priest. He's fighting with me again. So the priest he went up to the house to make peace anyway, and Sam, that's a lovely woman. For goodness sake, Sam, he says, would you behave yourself? And then he was sort of stuck for words. He didn't know what to say, and he looked down, and the collie dog was lying in front of the fire, and the cat was lying between the collie dog's legs, and the two of them were sleeping. And the priest says, Sam, look at that dog and cat, how well they're getting on. And Sam says, just try putting a rope on them. So, another wee quick, he talked about a lesson in economics or what have you. He worked for McMillan's in Donegal. Mrs. McMillan were very thrifty farmers and very lovely people. He worked for a good while with them and had always a big high regard for them. But at that time, you got 10 shillings for a fox. There was a bounty on a fox. Foxes were taboo, and you got the bounty. And there was a fox annoying the sheep that the McMillans had, and they caught the fox anyway, and got their 10 shillings. And my dad says to Mary, he called her, Mary, you done well there. 10 shillings. Tut, tut, Henry, she says. Nonsense. It wasn't all profit. Joseph paid a shilling for the snare. So, it's not all profit. But anyway, a wee story. The last one, I think I've kept you long enough, and I hope I haven't bored you too much. But my grandfather Hughes, he got left a wee legacy from his home place in Tyrone. They had a milling business and what have you, and he got a legacy, and he got word that he was left a bit of money, and he had to go to a solicitor's in Dungannon to collect his money. Mommy was telling me the story, and they took the train to Armagh and then Dungannon, and when they got to Dungannon, he got paid in cash. And when they came out of the solicitor's office, the first thing he done was take Mommy into a shop, and he bought her 3 new dresses. And a new dress at that time was gold dust. But he bought her 3 new dresses, whatever money he got. Mommy said it wasn't a fortune. But when she got home with the 3 dresses, the Megalorn girls were blew away. And they spent the whole day trying on the dresses, all the girls. There was 5 or 6 of the Megalorn. Mommy was an only girl. She had 3 boys in the house and the only girl. I suppose he maybe spoilt or idolized her or what have you. But That was 1929. So, talk about the eve of the Great Depression and all of that. There wasn't much about at that time, but he bought her the 3 dresses anyway. So, that's it for now anyway, part 1.